The Lord of the Rings by J.R.R. Tolkien. Book 1. The Fellowship of the Ring. Chapter 1. A long-expected party. When Mr. Bilbo Baggins of Bag End announced that he would shortly be celebrating his 11th birthday with a party of special magnificence, there was much talk and excitement in Hobbiton. Bilbo was very rich and very peculiar, and had been the wonder of the Shire for 60 years. Ever since his remarkable disappearance and unexpected return, the riches he had brought back from his travels had now become a local legend, and it was popularly believed, whatever the old folk might say, that the hill at Bag End was full of tunnels, stuffed with treasure. And if that was not enough of fame, there was also his prolonged vigor to marvel at. Time wore on, but it seemed to have little effect on Mr. Baggins. At 90 he was much the same as 50. At 99 they began to call him well-preserved, but unchanged would have been nearer the mark. There were some that shook their heads and thought this was too much of a good thing. It seemed unfair that anyone should possess, apparently, perpetual youth, as well as reputedly inexhaustible wealth. It'll have to be paid for. They said it isn't natural, and trouble will come of it. But so far trouble had not come. And as Mr. Baggins was generous with his money, most people were willing to forgive him his oddities and his good fortune. He remained on visiting terms with his relatives, except, of course, the Sackville Baggins. And he had many devoted admirers among the hobbits, of poor and unimportant families. But he had no close friends, until some of his younger cousins began to grow up. The eldest of these, and Bilbo's favorite, was young Frodo Baggins when Bilbo was 90. He adopted Frodo as his heir, and brought him to live at Bag End, and the hopes of the Sackville bagpipes were finally dashed. Bilbo and Frodo happened to have the same birthday, September the 22nd. "You had better come and live here, Frodo, my lad," said Bilbo, one day, "and then we can celebrate our birthday parties comfortably together at that time." Frodo was still in his teens, as the hobbits called the irresponsible 20s, between childhood and coming of age at 33. 12 more years passed each year. The Bagginses had given very lively, combined birthday parties at Bag End, but now it was understood that something quite exceptional was being planned. For that autumn Bilbo was going to be 11. 111. A rather curious number, and a very respectable age for a hobbit. The old Duke himself had only reached 100, and Frodo was going to be 33. 33 an important number. The date of his coming of age. Tongues began to wag in Hobbiton and By, and rumor of the coming event traveled all over the Shire. The history and character of Mr. Bilbo Baggins became once again the chief topic of conversation, and the older folk suddenly found their reminiscences in welcome demand. No one had a more attentive audience than old Ham Gamgee, commonly known as the Gaffer. He held forth at the Ivy Bush, a small inn on the Bywater Road, and he spoke with some authority, for he attended the garden at Bag End for 40 years, and had helped old Holman in the same job before that. Now that he was himself growing old and stiff in the joints, the job was mainly carried on by his youngest son, Sam Gamgee. Both father and son were on very friendly terms with Bilbo and Frodo. They lived on the hill itself in No. 3 Bagshot Row. Just below Bag End, a very nice, well-spoken gentle hobbit is Mr. Bilbo. As I've always said, the Gaffer declared with perfect truth, for Bilbo was very polite to him, calling him Master Hand, and consulting him constantly upon the growing of vegetables. In the matter of roots, especially potatoes, the Gaffer was recognized as the leading authority by all in the neighborhood, including himself. Put in Daddy Two-Foot, the Gaffer's next-door neighbor. If they live on the wrong side of the Brandywine River, And right again the old forest. That's a dark place if half the tales be true. You're right then, said the gaffer. Not that the Brandywine Bucks of Buckland live in the old forest. They're a queer breed, seemingly. They fool about with boats on that big river, and that is unnatural. Small wonder that trouble game of it, I say. But be that as it may, Mr. Frodo is as nice a young hobbit as you could wish to meet. Very much like Mr. Bilbo, and in more than looks. After all, his father was a baker. A decent, respectable hobbit was Mr. Drogo Baggins. Well, there never was much to tell of him. Till he was drowned, said several voices. They had heard this and other darker rumors before. Of course, but hobbits have a passion for family history. And they were ready to hear it again. Well, so they say, said the gaffer. You see, Mr. Drogo, he married poor Miss Primula Brand. She was our Mr. Bibble's first cousin on her mother's side, or her mother being the youngest of the old Tusk daughters, and Mr. Drogo was his second cousin. So Mr. Frodo is his first and second cousin. Once removed, either way, as the saying is, if you follow me. And Mr. Drogo was staying at Brandy Hall with his father-in-law, Master Gor, as he often did after his marriage, him being partial to his victuals, and an old Gorboduc keeping a mighty generous table. He went out boating on the Brandywine River, and he and his wife were drowned. And poor Mr. Frodo, only a child in all I've heard. They went on the water after dinner, in the moonlight, said old Knox. And it was Rogo's weight that sunk the boat. And I heard she pushed him in, and he pulled her in after him, said Sandyman, the Hobarton miller. You shouldn't listen to all you hear, said the gaffer, who did not much like the miller. There isn't no call to go. Talking of pushing and pulling, boats are quite tricky enough for those that sit still without looking further for the cause of trouble. Anyway, there was this. Mr. Frodo left an orphan and stranded, as you might say, among those square boatlanders being brought up anyhow. In Brandy Hall, a regular warrant by all accounts. Oh, Master Gorbot never had fewer than a couple of hundred relations in the place. Mr. Bilbo never did a kinder deed. Then when he brought the lad back to live among decent folk. But I reckon it was a nasty shock for those Sackville Bagginses. They thought they were going to get back in that time, when he went off and was thought to be dead. But then he comes back and orders them off, and goes on living, and never looking a day older. Bless him. And suddenly he produces an heir, and has all the papers made out proper. The sackful packages. We'll never see them inside a bag in now. Or at least, we hope not. There's a tidy bit of money tucked away up there, I hear tell, said a stranger. A visitor on business from Michael Delving in the west. Oh, the top of your hill is full of tunnels, packed with chests of gold and silver and jewels, by what I've heard. Then you've heard more than I can speak to, answered the gaffer. I know nothing about jewels. Mr. Pilpo is free with his money, and there seems no lack of it, but I know of no tunnel making. I saw Mr. Pilpoo when he came back, a matter of 60 years ago, when I was a lad. I've not long come practice to old Holman, him being my dad's cousin, but he had me up at bat, helping him to keep folks from trampling and traipsing all over the garden, while the sale was on. And in the middle of it all, Mr. Bilbo comes up the hill with a pony, and some mighty big bags and a couple of chests. I don't doubt they were mostly full of treasure he had picked up in foreign parts, where there be mountains of gold, they say. There wasn't enough to fill tunnels. But my lad, Sam, will know more about that. He's in and out of Back End. Crazy about stories of the old days, he is. And he listens to all Mr. Bilbo's tales. Mr. Bilbo has learned his letters meaning no harm. Mark, you and I hope no harm will come of the cows and dragons, I says to him. Cabbages and potatoes are better for me, and you don't go getting mixed up in the business of your betters, or you'll land in trouble. Too big for you, I says to him. And I might say it to others, he added with a look at the stranger and the miller. But the gaffer did not convince his audience. The legend of Bilbo's wealth was now too firmly fixed in the minds of the younger generation of hobbits Aye, but he has likely enough been added to what he brought. At first, argued the miller, voicing common opinion, he's often away from home. And look at the outlandish folk that visit him. Dwarves coming at night, and that old wandering conjurer, Gandalf and all. You can say what you like, Gaffer, but Back-End's a queer place, and its folk are queerer. And you can say what you like about what you know. No more than you do in Bolton, Mr. Sandyman, retorted the Gaffer, disliking the miller even more than usual. If that's being queer, and we could do with a bit more queerness. In these parts, there's some not far away that wouldn't offer a pint of beer to a friend if they lived in a hole of golden walls. But they do things proper. At Back-End, our Sam said that everyone's going to be invited to the party. And there's going to be presents. Mark you presents for all this very month as is. That very month was September, and as fine as you could ask. A day or two later, a rumor, probably started by the knowledgeable Sam, was spread about that they were going to be fireworks. Fireworks, what is more, such as had not been seen in the Shire for nigh on a century. Not indeed since the old Duke died. Days passed, and the day drew nearer. An odd-looking wagon, laden with odd-looking packages, rolled into Hobarton one evening, and toiled up the hill to Bag-End. The startled hobbits peered out of lamplit doors to gape at it. It was driven by outlandish folk singing strange songs. Dwarves with long beards and deep hoods. A few of them remained at Bag-End. At the end of the second week in September, a cart came in through water. From the direction of the Brandywine Bridge, in broad daylight, an old man was driving it all alone. He wore a tall, pointed blue hat, a long gray cloak, and a silver scarf. He had a long white beard and bushy eyebrows that stuck out beyond the brim of his hat. Small hobbit children ran after the cart, all through Hobbiton and right up the hill. It had a cargo of fireworks. As they rightly guessed, at Bilbo's front door, the old man began to unload. There were great bundles of fireworks, of all sorts and shapes, each labeled with the large red Fëanorian G and the Elfruin G. That was Gandalf's mark, of course, and the old man was Gandalf the Wizard, whose fame in the Shire was due mainly to his skill with fires, smokes, and lights. His real business was far more difficult and dangerous. But the Shire folk knew nothing about it. To them, he was just one of the attractions at the party. Hence the excitement of the hobbit children. "G for grand," they shouted. And the old man smiled. They knew him by sight, though he only appeared in Hobarton occasionally, and never stopped long. But neither they, nor any but the oldest of their elders, had seen one of his firework displays. They now belonged to the legendary past. When the old man, helped by Bilbo and some dwarves, had finished unloading, Bilbo gave a few pennies away, but not a single squib or cracker was forthcoming. To the disappointment of the onlookers, "Run away now," said Gandalf, "of you will get plenty when the time comes." Then he disappeared inside with Bilbo, and the door was shut. The young hobbit stared at the door in vain for a while, and then made up, feeling that the day of the party would never come. Inside Back-End, Bilbo and Gandalf were sitting at the open window of a small room, looking out west, onto the garden. The late afternoon was bright and peaceful. The flowers glowed red and golden. Snapdragons and sunflowers and Astorians trailing all over the turf walls and peeping in at the round windows. "How bright your garden looks," said Gandalf. "Yes," said Bilbo. "I'm very fond indeed of it, and of all the dear old Shire. But I think I need a holiday." "You mean to go on with your plan then?" "I do. I made up my mind months ago. And I haven't changed it very well. It is no good saying any more. Stick to your plan, your whole plan, mind. And I hope it will turn out for the best. For you, and for all of us, I hope so. Anyway, I mean, to enjoy myself on Thursday and have my little joke. Who laugh, I wonder? Said Gandalf, shaking his head. We shall see, said Bilbo. The next day, more carts rolled up the hill, and still more carts. There might have been some grumbling about dealing locally, but that very week, orders began to pour out of Bag End for every kind of provision, commodity, or luxury that could be obtained in Hobart, or Bywater, or anywhere in the neighborhood. People became enthusiastic, and they began to tick off the days on the calendar, and they watched eagerly for the postman, hoping for invitations. Before long, the invitations began pouring out, and the Hobarton post office was blocked, and the Bywater post office was snowed under, and voluntary assistant postmen were called for. There was a constant stream of them going up the hill, carrying hundreds of polite variations on, "Thank you, I shall certainly come." A notice appeared on the gate at Back End: no admittance, except on party business. Even those who had or pretended to have party business were seldom allowed inside. Bilbo was busy writing invitations, ticking of answers, packing up presents, and making some private preparations of his own. From the time of Gandalf's arrival, he remained hidden from view. One morning, the hobbits woke to find a large field, south of Bilbo's front door, covered with ropes and poles for tents and pavilions. A special entrance was cut into the bank, leading to the road, and wide steps and a large white gate were built there. And there the three hobbled families of Bag Roa, joining the field, were intensely interested and generally envied. Old Gaffer Gamgee stopped even pretending to work in his garden. The tents began to go up. There was a specially large pavilion, so big that the tree that grew in the field was right inside it and stood proudly near one end. At the head of the chief table, lanterns were hung on all its branches. More promising still to the hobbit's mind, an enormous open-air kitchen was erected. In the north corner of the field, a draft of cooks from every inn and eating house 4 miles around arrived to supplement the dwarves and other old folk that were quartered at Bag End. Excitement rose to its height. Then the weather clouded over. That was on Wednesday. The eve of the party anxiety was intense. Then, Thursday, September the 22nd, actually dawned. The sun got up, the clouds vanished. Flags were unfurled, and the fun began. Bilbo Baggins called it a party, but it was really a variety of entertainments, rolled into one. Practically everybody living near was invited. A very few were overlooked by accident, but as they turned up all the same, that did not matter. Many people from other parts of the Shire were also asked, and there were even a few from outside the borders. Bilbo met the guests and auditions at the new White Gate. In person, he gave away presents to all and sundry. The latter were those who went out again by a back way and came in again by the gate. Hobbits give presents to other people on their own birthdays, not very expensive ones as a rule, and not so lavishly as on this occasion, but it was not a bad system. Actually, in Hobbiton and by every day in the year, it was somebody's birthday, so that every hobbit in those parts had a fair chance of at least one present at least once a week. But they never got tired of them. On this occasion, the presents were unusually good. The hobbit children were so excited that for a while they almost forgot about eating. There were toys, the like of which they had never seen before, all beautiful and some obviously magical. Many of them had indeed been ordered a year before and had come all the way from the mountain and from dale and were of real dwarf make. When every guest had been welcomed and was finally inside the gate, there were songs, dances, music, games, and of course, food and drink. There were 3 official meals: lunch, tea, and dinner or supper. But lunch and tea were marked chiefly by the fact that at those times all the guests were sitting down and eating together. At other times, there were nearly lots of people eating and drinking continuously from 11 Cs until 6:30, when the fireworks started. The fireworks were by Gandalf. They were not only brought by him, but designed and made by him, and the special effects, set pieces, and flights of rockets were let off by him. There was also a generous distribution of crackers, backreppers, sparklers, torches, dwarf candles, elf fountains, goblin barkers, and thunderclaps. They were all superb. The art of Gandalf improved with age. There were rockets, like a flight of scintillating birds, singing with sweet voices. There were green trees with trunks of dark smoke. Their leaves opened like a whole spring, unfolding in a moment, and their shining branches dropped glowing flowers down upon the astonished hobbits, disappearing with the sweet scent just before they touched their upturned faces. There were fountains of butterflies that flew, glittering into the trees. There were pillars of colored fires that rose and turned into eagles or sailing ships, or a phalanx of flying swans. There was a red thunderstorm, and a shower of yellow rain. There was a forest of silver spears that sprang suddenly into the air, with a yell like an embattled army, and came down again into the water with a hiss, like 100 hot snakes. And there was also one last surprise in honor of Bilbo. And it startled the hobbits exceedingly, as Gandalf intended. The lights went out. A great smoke went up. It shaped itself like a mountain, seeming in the distance, and began to glow. At the summit, it spouted green and scarlet flames. Out flew a red golden dragon. Not life-size, but terribly lifelike. Fire came from its jaws, its eyes glared down. There was a war, and he whizzed 3 times over the heads of the crowd. They all ducked, and many fell flat on their faces. The dragon passed like an express train, turned a somersault, and burst over Bywater with a deafening explosion. "Is the signal for supper," said Bilbo. The pain and alarm vanished at once, and the prostrate hobbits left to their feet. There was a splendid supper for everyone that is, except those invited to the special family dinner party. This was held in the great pavilion with the tree. The invitations were limited to 12 dozen, a number also called by the hobbits 1 gross, though the word was not considered property to use, of people, and their guests were selected from all the families to which Bilbo and Frodo were related, with the addition of a few special unrelated friends, such as Gandalf. Many young hobbits were included, and present by parental permission, for hobbits were easy-going with their children, in the matter of sitting up late, especially when there was a chance of getting them a free meal. Bringing up young hobbits took a lot of preventive. There were many Baggins, and also many Tufts and Brandybucks. They were various Grubbs, relations of Bilbo Baggins' grandmother, and various Chubbs connections of his Tuft grandfather, and a selection of Barrows Bulges, Bracegirdles, Brockhouses, Goodbody's Hornblowers, and Cloudfins. Some of these were only very distantly connected with Bilbo, and some of them had hardly ever been in Hobbit before, as they lived in remote corners of the Shire. The Sackville Bagginses were not forgotten. Otho and his wife Lobelia were present. They disliked Bilbo and detested Frodo. But so magnificent was the invitation card, written with golden ink, that they had felt it was impossible to refuse. Besides, their cousin, Bilbo, had been specializing in food for many years, and his table had a high reputation. All the 144 guests expected a pleasant feast, though they rather dreaded the after-dinner speech of their host, an inevitable item. He was liable to drag in bits of what he called poetry, and sometimes, after a glass or two, would allude to the absurd adventures of his mysterious journey. The guests were not disappointed. They had a very pleasant feast. In fact, an engrossing entertainment, rich, abundant, varied, and prolonged. The purchase of provisions fell almost to nothing throughout the district in the ensuing weeks, but as Bilbo's catering had depleted the stocks of most stores, cellars, and warehouses for miles around, that did not matter much. After the feast, more or less, came the speech. Most of the company were, however, now in a tolerant mood at that delightful stage, which they called filling up the corners. They were sipping their favorite drinks and nibbling at their favorite dainties, and their fears were forgotten. They were prepared to listen to anything, and to cheer at every full stop. My dear people, began Bilbo, rising in his place here. Here, 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 they shouted, and kept on repeating it in chorus, seeming reluctant to follow their own advice. Bilbo left his place and went and stood on a chair under the illuminated tree. The light of the lanterns fell on his beaming face. The golden buttons shone on his embroidered silk waistcoat. They could all see him standing, waving one hand in the air. The other was in his trouser pocket. "My dear bagpipes and buffoons," he began again. "And bogers brace skirls. Good bodies, brockhouses, and proud feet, shouted an elderly hobbit from the back of the pavilion. His name, of course, was Proudfoot, and well merited. His feet were large, exceptionally furry, and both were on the table. "Proudfoot," repeated Bilbo also. "My good Sackville Bag, that I welcome back at last to Bag End. Today is my 111th birthday. I am 71 today, hooray! Hooray, many happy returns," they shouted, and they hammered joyously on the tables. Bobo was doing splendidly. This was the sort of stuff they liked. Short and obvious. I hope you're all enjoying yourselves as much as I am. Deafening cheers. Cries of yes and no. Noises of trumpets and horns, pipes and flutes and other musical instruments. There were, as has been said, many young hobbits present. Hundreds of musical crackers had been pulled. Most of them bore the Markdale on them, which did not convey much to most of the hobbits, but they all agreed they were marvelous crackers. They contained instruments, small but of perfect make and enchanting tones. Indeed, in one corner, some of the young two and brandy, supposing Uncle Bilbo to have finished, since he had plainly said all that was necessary now, got up an impromptu orchestra and began a merry dance. Tune Master Everhard Duke and Miss Melilot Brandy Buck got on the table and with bells in their hands, began to dance the spring ring, a pretty dance but rather vigorous. But Bilbo had not finished. Seizing a horn from a youngster nearby, he blew 3 loud hoots. The noise subsided. "They shall not keep you long," he cried. Cheers from all the assembly. "I have called you all together for a purpose." Something in the way that he said this made an impression. There was almost silence, and one or two of the two pricked up their ears. Indeed, for 3 purposes. First of all, to tell you that I am immensely fond of you all, and that 71 years is too short a time to live among such excellent and admirable habits. Tremendous outburst of approval. "I don't know half of you, half as well as I should like. And I like less than half of you, half as well as you deserve." This was unexpected and rather difficult. There was some scattered clapping, but most of them were trying to work it out and see if it came to a compliment. Secondly, to celebrate my birthday. Cheers again. I should say, our birthday. For it is, of course, also, the birthday of my heir and nephew Frodo. He comes of age and into his inheritance today. Some perfunctory clapping from the elders, and some loud shouts of "Frodo, Frodo, jolly old Frodo" from the juniors. The Sackville Baggins is scowled, and wondered what was meant by coming into his inheritance. Together we score 1. Your numbers were chosen to fit this remarkable total. 1 gross, if I may use the expression. No cheers. This was ridiculous. Many of his guests, and especially the Sackville Baggins, were insulted, feeling sure they had only been asked to fill up the required number, like goods in a package. Pondering, indeed, vulgar expression. It is also, if I may be allowed to refer to ancient history, the anniversary of my arrival by barrel at Asgard on the Long Lake. Though the fact that it was my birthday slipped my memory on that occasion, I was